Part 52. A Middle School Cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 513. Chapter 513 For the Joy That Makes My Soul Tremble. If the previous serialization order of the comics One Punch Man and My Hero Academia did not attract much attention from readers, then in the new issue of the weekly magazine, the two comics just swapped their positions and still maintain the serialization order of one after another, which would naturally make readers notice it. The reason why they deliberately used such a sequence for serialization, perhaps the weekly editors wanted readers to directly compare the two comics when observing the comics. For such an arrangement by the weekly editors, Yoshida and Yujiro, two very responsible editors, revealed the intention of the weekly editors to the cartoonists they were responsible for in a very tactful way. However, whether it was Makoto Takahashi or Eiji Niizuma, they both adopted an attitude of acquiescence and ignorance for such behavior of the weekly editors. Regarding this kind of behavior from the weekly editorial side? That's right. Although those insignificant ants on the editorial side dared to plot against me, this really makes me angry. This kind of crazy way of speaking, needless to say, you can tell that this is the scene of a middle school cartoonist replying to a responsible editor. But seeing that the group of ants tried so hard to put on such a poor performance to please me, I will mercifully not pursue the offense. Humph. Should I say we are grateful for your kindness, your majesty now? Yoshida stared at Takahashi Makoto with a long face, and wanted to be venomous, but when he thought of the results of the reader survey on the new serial One Punch Man that he saw before the new issue of the weekly magazine was released, he couldn't help but slow down his tone and sighed to Takahashi Makoto with some regret. Originally, the first episode of the new serial was the best chance to win the first place. Unfortunately, this time, 6 new comics were serialized at the same time, and finally the first episode of One Punch Man was ranked second with a slight disadvantage. Tisk, Ah-chan, you are just asking for it. Tisk. My beloved cat, the serialization of the comic One Punch Man has just started, right? It seems that the issue of the weekly magazine released yesterday only published the content of the second episode of One Punch Man. And Takahashi Makoto glanced at Yoshida with disdain, and continued to lower his head to complete the comic manuscript. Is the first place really that easy to get? Humph. Even as a time traveler, I dare not underestimate the humans in this world. My beloved cat, where did you get the courage to ignore everything? As an owner, I don't remember ever educating you to have such an arrogant personality. So Yoshida, you are completely courting death by mocking Takahashi Makoto with your own fault. Yoshida, who was strongly counter-complained by a certain middle school cartoonist, seemed unwilling to continue to be so miserable, so he took the initiative to use the skill of topic change. By the way, Chen, are you really not worried about the future performance of One Punch Man? You know, Eiji Niizuma's My Hero Academia is, hey, Chen, what's with that look in your eyes? Every time I see Seiji's chess skills improve, or Rin shows his talent in magic, I, who am not good at speaking, always use my eyes to encourage the children. Takahashi Makoto, who suddenly switched to the good father mode, suddenly sighed with melancholy. After all, as a creature who is not good at expressing emotions, when seeing the growth of children, I don't know how to express my gratification, so I can only secretly pay attention to my children from the side. So, Chen, don't stare at me with the eyes you look at Seiji and Rin. I'm not your child, although Takahashi Makoto's tone and demeanor at this moment perfectly interpret a father who is not good at speaking but very caring for his children, but the target is wrong, right? Yoshida said that he was just the editor-in-chief, not a child of a certain Chuyunabaku manga artist. Tisk, my beloved cat, you are discriminating. Absolutely discriminating. Takahashi Makoto put down his brush, clenched his fist and waved at Yoshida. A certain Chuyunabaku manga artist turned on the crazy cute mode. In a sense, the owner can be regarded as a parent. But as a male, I naturally can't be a mother. Uh, Stop talking nonsense here, Makoto, forcefully changing the topic when you can't argue. Yoshida, your clumsy method is really childish. In the weekly magazine published yesterday, the editorial department deliberately put the comic My Hero Academia before One Punch Man. Chen, you already understand the reason. Yeah, they want to encourage me and the King of Black Flame to fight each other, and give the other new series a chance to develop. Although he wanted to continue to make Yoshida angry again, after hearing Yoshida start talking about this topic, Takahashi Makoto could only regretfully postpone his behavior of gaining pleasure, and followed Yoshida's topic. But my beloved cat, before discussing this issue, are you sure you have read the content of the second chapter of the comic One Punch Man carefully? Of course. Of course I have read it carefully, Yoshida, the panic in your eyes has completely betrayed you. Really? Makoto Takahashi narrowed his eyes and looked at his editor-in-chief, revealing a sinister smile, and asked sinisterly, then my dear cat, please tell me what the name of the male protagonist is. Since you, my dear cat, have carefully read the second episode of the comic One Punch Man, you don't even know the name of the male protagonist, right? The name of the male protagonist is, Yoshida tried hard to recall the plot of the comic, but his face was pale. Huh? You don't even know the name of the male protagonist? Makoto Takahashi was very happy to have successfully tricked Yoshida. Tisk tisk tisk, my dear cat, as the editor-in-chief of the editorial side, as the elite among the elites, you don't even know the name of the male protagonist of a comic that has been serialized for 2 chapters? Are you really a man? Your editor-in-chief soul is crying again. Sorry, Makoto. I didn't look carefully enough. After struggling for a moment, Yoshida sincerely apologized to Takahashi Makoto. Is an apology useful? Humph. My cat, do you think that an apology can undo the damage you have caused? Can the victim be resurrected after the murderer apologizes? After nature is destroyed, can an apology reset the world? The reason why this world has become so corrupt and why human beings have become worse and worse is largely because there are too many people like you. Hey, Chen. Thinking that an apology can pay for everything, humans are just creatures like this after all. Under Yoshida's gaze of completely hopeless, Takahashi Chen continued his sigh without feeling. People should not only know how to hurt each other, but also understand the importance of bonds and the greatness of love. So, it is precisely because of this that the world needs people like me to guide humans to make changes. I will seriously read the second episode of One Punch Man again now. Yoshida took out the new issue of Weekly Shonen Jump from his slack bag with trembling hands. With a face full of near collapse, begging Takahashi Makoto for mercy, so, Chen, please stop talking. You only know to reobserve now. Humph, my cat, I will never forgive you before you commit suicide 1,000 times to apologize. I know, I promise that I will read the comics carefully this time, I swear. After seeing Yoshida really start to observe the comics carefully, Takahashi Makoto showed a fox-like smile, lowered his head and began to draw the comics. However, this time Takahashi Makoto did not show the previous superb drawing speed. On the contrary, because most of his attention was focused on Yoshida, the speed of completing the comics has decreased a lot. The second episode of One Punch Man tells the story of the bald male protagonist before he became a hero. According to the setting in the comics, it is a plot 3 years ago with memories. Every existence that becomes a hero needs an opportunity. In order to become a superhero, in addition to having the corresponding awareness and will, you also have to pay the corresponding price, and this, maybe it is also to abide by the rule of equivalent exchange. Before becoming a hero, a bald male protagonist was just an ordinary person looking for a job, and he was unlucky to fail the interview again. Even after meeting a weirdo on the road, he was let go because of the other party's sympathy. It turns out that the male protagonist looks pretty good when he has hair. and he has a bit of a tsundere personality. Yoshida read it very seriously this time, and read the dialogues in the comics very carefully. He said he didn't want to save the ugly kid, but when he saw the crab monster was about to kill the child, he rushed out and saved the child. Wait. This plot, I seem to have seen it somewhere. After hesitating for a moment, Yoshida decisively stopped observing the comic One Punch Man and began to quickly flip forward the weekly magazine, and soon found the familiar scene in his memory. Although the way of description is a little different, but it is indeed like this. Hey, my cat, have you finished reading the comics? Seeing you so excited, have you found the name of the male protagonist? No, I just found something I care about. Tisk, you are really slow. Yoshida, who was observing the comics, naturally did not notice the almost broken smile on the face of a certain Chuyuni cartoonist, but according to the rules of the universe, a certain editor-in-chief did feel a chill. The expression of my cat after knowing the truth is really worth looking forward to. But now is not the time. When you are hungry, you will regard the food you eat as the most delicious food, so by the same token, when I see my cat stepping into the trap unconsciously and being tricked, it is naturally the happiest time for me. So I still need to be patient now. For the joy that makes my soul tremble. I thought I couldn't catch up with the update today, so I worked overtime. The leader moves his mouth, and the subordinates run their legs off. Now a cat finally knows the true meaning of this sentence. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 514. The second chapter of the comic One Punch Man does not tell an overly complicated plot. It just describes the story of a certain bald man when he was young and had handsome hair. Just when the crab monster wanted to kill the child, the male protagonist, who originally had no intention of saving the child, suddenly changed his mind and stepped forward to save the child. At that time, there was no bald man male protagonist, he was just an ordinary person. When facing the crab monster who had killed many people, it was natural for him to be beaten in various ways. In the process of being beaten away by the crab monster again and again, the male protagonist did not give up. Although the injuries all over his body were serious, the male protagonist still stood in front of the frustrated-looking naughty kid with no intention of giving up. That's right, I have always dreamed of becoming a hero since I was a child. On the contrary, in the process of being beaten by the crab weirdo in various ways, the male protagonist was no longer confused. Writing this, I hope readers will remember our domain name Taiwan Novel Network Rightward Arrow. I'm not an office worker, but a hero who can defeat you scum with just one punch. The male protagonist was knocked away and dripping with blood. Just by observing the comics, one could guess the ferocity of the crab monster's blow. I'm not looking for a job anymore. Come on over here, you bastard. Ignoring the blood streaming from his head, the actor pulled off his tie and sternly declared a duel to the crab weirdo. There is no need to describe the following plot in detail. After issuing a declaration of victory that only the protagonist can use, the crab weirdo who has been beating the male protagonist in a fancy way in the comic has his exposed eyes tied by the male protagonist. He was trapped and violently killed by the male protagonist who was just an ordinary person. Thinking of it, 3 years have passed since then. I trained with the momentum of braving my hair, and finally gained nearly invincible combat power, and I should have become my ideal hero. But why? Why am I not satisfied yet? At the end of the second chapter of the comic One Punch Man, there is a monologue from the male protagonist who switches back to bald mode. The picture that goes with this monologue is the back view of a bald man wearing a hero costume, carrying a large bag of daily necessities, visually inspecting the supermarket purchase. Although Yoshida is a little concerned about the monologue at the end, even though Yoshida now wants to share with Takahashi Makoto the problems he has discovered before, even though Yoshida now wants to ask Takahashi Makoto to confirm something. But after carefully observing the second chapter of the comic One Punch Man this time, Yoshida still did not see the name of the male protagonist in the comic. In the content of this episode, from beginning to end, the name of the bald male protagonist was not mentioned at all. My familiar cat, have you finished reading the manga? Makoto Takahashi saw Yoshida put down the weekly Shonen Jump in his hand, and stared at Yoshida expectantly, with a vague expression on his face. Smiling, so now, you can answer the questions I asked before. Now, I mean Aiken. Yoshida frowned, and after hesitating for a moment, he asked with some uncertainty, before I answer your question, I need to confirm one other thing first, are you sure? Is the name of the bald male protagonist really revealed in the serialization? Hey! Have you been discovered? Makoto Takahashi, who knew clearly that covering up is a hint, naturally would not add superfluous words such as I don't know what you are talking about and I don't understand what you are talking about to cover it up. As an honest cartoonist, Makoto Takahashi frankly admitted the truth observed by Yoshida. After eliminating all impossible choices, the only option left is of course the so-called truth. But for Yoshida, the candid and cooperative attitude of a certain middle-class cartoonist definitely added fuel to the fire. Tisk, that's true. Let me tell you, after reading it carefully 3 times, why didn't I find the name of the male protagonist? It turns out that Cheng, you didn't reveal it in the comic at all. Yoshida's face at this moment, his expression has been completely distorted, because until this moment, Yoshida finally determined that the reason why Takahashi Makoto raised the question what is the name of the male protagonist was because he had the mentality of teasing him from the beginning. How to be tricked and killed. After all, being teased is a rather unpleasant thing. Huh? Are you kidding me? It's obviously because you didn't read the comics carefully enough. As a teaser, Takahashi Makoto said that he was quite happy at the moment. Of course, in order to restrain a responsible editor from going berserk at the critical moment, talking must be used. Obviously it is the mistake that I have made, but I always have to blame it on others. It is obvious that my failure is due to my lack of experience, but I have to attribute the blame to the process that others committed when they were young. Oh my, human beings, this kind of creature is really hopeless. Question, what's more unpleasant than being teased? The answer is of course someone like Yoshida. After being righteously reprimanded for various reasons before, he fell into deep guilt and self-blame. But the next second he discovered that the person he had just occupied, the guy who lectures people with great righteousness, is actually the villain who leads all the shady plots. This strong contrast from good guy to demon is what makes people even more uncomfortable. I'm talking about Cheng, you guy. Yoshida gritted his teeth and stared at Takahashi Makoto. If eyes could kill, Yoshida would definitely kill a certain middle-class cartoonist 1,000 times. Oh? Do you want to confront me head-on? Makoto Takahashi seemed to enjoy the pleasure brought by Yoshida's expression at this moment, and slowly pulled out the magic sword on the table without caring. Okay. It's just my familiar cat. Oh, if you want to kill someone, you will be killed. Have you already realized this? Yoshida's sudden silence at this moment not only means a helpless compromise, but also means that a certain editor has gradually calmed down. After taking a deep breath, Yoshida tried his best to use a calm tone and tried to resume communication with a certain middle-class cartoonist. Cheng, you should have read the second episode of My Hero Academia by Eiji Arizuma in this weekly issue, right? I was just re-watching One Punch Man and suddenly discovered something interesting things. Tisk, I thought you would lose your mind and come to me, my cat? Ah, that's a bit boring. Watching Yoshida calm down gradually, and began to talk about comics-related matters as the editor-in-chief, after Makoto Takahashi complained with some disappointment, he also entered the cartoonist mode. Huh? Interesting thing? My favorite cat, are you talking about Psy? Ahem, are you thinking? Let's talk about the plot where the hero saves the naughty kid. Sure enough, Cheng, you have noticed it too. Yoshida, who did not notice that Takahashi Makoto almost revealed the name of the male protagonist, continued to talk about his new discoveries while observing comics, although in terms of subject matter and type, the comic One Punch Man and the comic My Hero Academia, as comics serialized in weekly magazines during the same period, should be regarded as each other's most threatening competitors. However, just as Yoshida was explaining his new findings to Makoto Takahashi, AG, the new wife who was observing this issue of the magazine, was also communicating with his editor-in-chief Yujiro. Is this the great will of the universe, or the choice of Stein's gate? Should I say that I am worthy of being a Phoenix-in teacher? Eiji Nyaizuma put down the manga magazine in his hand and suppressed the smile that often appeared on his face in the past. Sure enough, the original decision to serialize the manga My Hero Academia is quite interesting. Quite the right choice. Nyaizuma-kun, why did you say that? As the editor-in-chief of the weekly, in addition to the new serial My Hero Academia by Eiji Nyaizuma that he is responsible for, Yujiro also carefully observes the weekly articles among the other comics serialized. I naturally have a certain understanding of Makoto Takahashi's One Punch Man. Regardless of the subject matter or the type of comics, the new serialization of One Punch Man by Mr. Phoenix Institute can be regarded as the most threatening to your My Hero Academia based on the current situation. Opponent. And in the last reader survey ranking, if it weren't for the fact that your two comics were mutually exclusive, you might have been able to get the first place. Yuichiro-san is indeed an idiot. Unlike Makoto Takahashi's attitude towards Yoshida, Eiji Nyaizuma only occasionally complained and ridiculed Yujiro. The ranking in the reader survey, or even the scores of the comics, are not important to me. But, having an opponent like the Phoenix Academy teacher, and having an enemy like the comic One Punch Man is more important and more important to me. Interesting things to say. Although Yuichiro didn't react at the first time, seeing the high-spirited look of his new wife Eiji, he instantly understood what the cartoonist under his command was thinking. Yujiro had a helpless smile on his face, looked at the weekly magazine in his hand, and asked Nyaizuma Eiji with some doubts, Nizuma-kun, if I understand correctly, you mean, 2 chapters have been serialized and there is still no content. The name of the protagonist of One Punch Man has been revealed, and as the author of this comic, Mr. Kuma from the Phoenix Academy, is he an opponent you are looking forward to? Of course. As a companion or ally, use the name Shinkai Makoto to carry out the serialization in the monthly magazine, and then as an opponent or powerful rival, carry out a new serialization duel and contest in the weekly magazine. The fire of fighting spirit seemed to burn in Nyaizuma Eiji's eyes. There is nothing more interesting to say than this. Honestly, I don't quite understand what you think. Yujiro shook his head helplessly, but Shinzuma-kun, as long as you feel happy. Oh, Yuichiro-san is quite reasonable at this time. Eiji Nyaizuma held the weekly magazine tightly with an expectant smile on his face. Sure enough, drawing comics is the most interesting thing. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 515. If you want to become a hero, what exactly do you need to meet? According to the setting in the comic My Hero Academia, a person who does not have a personality is just an ordinary person, and an ordinary person without any abilities who wants to become a hero, as described in the comic in the world view, it is basically impossible. Therefore, it is also basically impossible for Izuku Midoriya to become a hero. However, when the first chapter of the manga My Hero Academia is coming to an end, the manga artist Eiji Nyaizuma has laid a foreshadowing that readers are looking forward to, that is, for Midoriya Izuku to meet the person he has always admired. The hero Oromander. And Oromand, the uncle who is regarded as the #1 hero, not only showed great strength when he first appeared on the stage, but also saved the hero Izuku Midoriya who was in crisis. Although the first chapter of the manga My Hero Academia ended here, readers who have already observed the manga are very much looking forward to the next content of the manga. Now that he has met Oromand, who is regarded as the number one hero, it means that maybe the possibility of Izuku Midoriya wanting to become a hero has not been completely eliminated. As the number one hero, Oromand only appeared in Izuku Midoriya's admiration and yearning. Counting his final appearance in the first episode, Oromand only showed what non-human beings can do. It's just his overwhelming combat power. As for what Oromand's personality is and what kind of special abilities he possesses, they are not mentioned at all in the comics. I finally met the idol I had long admired, and was saved from a crisis by him. If we use the favorability setting in the strategy game as an analogy, Izuku Midoriya has a lot of feelings for the uncle-level hero Ulu. Mander's favorability is definitely through the roof. Fortunately, My Hero Academia is a shounen manga and not a gay manga. Otherwise, the next plot of the manga will definitely become a philosophical discussion between the uncle and Shota, and verify that all roads lead to philosophy. Every brother is a king, the content of this teaching of a certain religion. But the only thing that cannot be denied is that Izuku Midoriya trusts Oromand far more than his own parents. Human beings are not gods, so in their short and long life, they will have various expectations and longings for the future, which will also cause confusion. Whenever human beings fall into confusion, they always subconsciously rely on others, hoping that the idols they admire can help them get out of confusion. Even if the other party just gives a way forward, or even just acknowledges it with a little pity, it can still give a strange creature like human beings a strong will and determination to keep moving forward in that direction. Let's not talk about whether this behavior is ignorant or courageous. However, it is undeniable that those who can move in one direction will one day shine with light that will blind those who only know how to evaluate. Those who stand still in front of others. Therefore, in the comics, in order to prove his idea to Oromand, Izuku Midoriya, regardless of the danger to his life, forcibly hugged the uncle Oromand's thigh. In other words, this is the legendary fight with life dream behavior. Can you become a hero even if you don't have a personality? Izuku Midoriya asked his obsessive question again, facing his idol Oromand, whom he admired. Even a person without personality can become like you. After being diagnosed as having no personality when he was a child, the doctor directly told Izuku Midoriya to give up the unrealistic ideal of becoming a hero, and Izuku Midoriya's mother, although not directly telling the cruel answer like the doctor, Izuku Midoriya, however, did not give a white lie to Izuku Midoriya, who was still a child. He just held the crying child in his arms, apologizing repeatedly while washing his face with tears. And now facing the Oromand he has longed for, the existence that he has longed for and worked hard for since he was a child, Izuku Midoriya is willing to bet on the consciousness of knowing the answer even if his life is in danger, and I want to get an answer from Oromand, or in other words, recognition. Because I have no personality, I have always been regarded as a fool. Maybe it's not just for this reason? I don't know if it's because of this, but I think saving others is a very cool thing. With a fearless attitude, save humanity with a smile, and I can become a hero like you. Because in the comics, Izuku Midoriya did not notice the changes in Oluman's body, but was immersed in describing his own confusion. However, before Izuku Midoriya finished speaking, he watched. When it comes to Oromand, it becomes a different look. Looking at the scrawny guy in front of him now, it was really hard for Midoriya Izuku to imagine that this was the muscular brother Gui who saved him before, the Oromand who was regarded as the number one hero. Although Oromand's sudden change of appearance in the comic is full of joy and cute contrasts, many readers of the comic can no longer care about it at this moment. Because of what Oromand said next, Izuku Midoriya, who had finally raised his hopes, severely shattered Izuku Midoriya's last illusion. The symbol of peace who saves mankind with a smile must not succumb to evil. Oromand briefly told why he became like this, and finally began to appear with Midoriya under the expectation of many readers. After a long exchange, the reason why I laugh is to deceive myself from the burden of the hero and the fear welling up in my heart. Professional heroes have to put their lives on the line at all times, so although it's not completely unspeakable to say you can do it without personality, I really can't say it. Having dreams is not a bad thing. Oromand walked to the door, leaving a back view of Midoriya Izuku, the devastated young man, and added a warning, but, relatively yes, you must see the reality clearly, young man. Just when many readers were still feeling sorry for Midoriya Izuku, the devastated boy, and wanted to see how the manga would develop next, they discovered that the plot of the manga had jumped to another scene. According to Yujiro's words, Eiji's new wife seems to have become bad since becoming an ally with Makoto Takahashi. The most obvious example is that in the comics serialized after that, whenever the plot develops to a critical part, Nyaizuma Eiji will either deliberately block the plot or switch scenes, which is a behavior that deliberately whets the reader's appetite. Isn't that what a middle-class cartoonist is good at? A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 516. Fortunately, this time, Eiji Nizuma did not go so far as to split this chapter into 2 chapters. Otherwise, regardless of the reaction from the readers, I'm afraid Yujiro would start to harass Eiji Nizuma first, right? The mud that was defeated by Oromand before has now harassed a new target. And this unlucky guy chosen by the mud is the classmate who had a strong quirk and had mocked and ridiculed Izuku Midoriya before. Because of the compatibility problem between quirks, the professional heroes who came to rescue could only stop and watch. Even the hero Oromand had to temporarily shrink in the crowd because of his physical problem. At this time, Izuku Midoriya, who had just been hit hard, tried his best to suppress his curiosity and walk away as if he didn't see it, but in the end, because of the habit he had formed for a long time, or because of other reasons, he couldn't help but squeeze into the crowd. Izuku Midoriya, who was hiding in the crowd, recognized the culprit who caused the commotion. It was the mud that attacked him before. Not only that, Izuku Midoriya also recognized that the person who was entangled by the mud and showed a painful expression was his classmate. After hearing the news of waiting for Oromand from the crowd around him, Izuku Midoriya covered his mouth with both hands, thinking that the reason for this situation was entirely because he was pestering Oromand, and thinking back to the physical problems of Oromand before, Izuku Midoriya felt a sense of guilt that was hard to shake off. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, help will be here soon. A certain hero, will be here soon. In the previous page of the comic, Izuku Midoriya, who was hiding in the crowd with his hands covering his mouth, suddenly rushed out from the crowd on the next page of the comic, then threw his skull bag into the mud, and then rushed forward, trying to pull out his classmates who were entangled in the mud. Why did he suddenly run? Why did he suddenly rush out? Not only did the classmates who were entangled in the mud ask this, but Izuku Midoriya asked himself this. Even the readers who observed the comics were curious about why Izuku Midoriya did this. My feet moved on their own. Ask me why, I don't know why. I think there should be various reasons, but. Midoriya Izuku said his truest thoughts while anxiously grabbing and doing useless work. You, put on a look of asking for help. The plot after the comics is as many readers expected. The suddenly erupted Urumanda transformed into a muscular brother again. While shouting professional heroes must gamble their lives at all times, he stood in front of Midoriya Izuku with blood gushing out of his mouth. Not only did he save Midoriya Izuku at the critical moment, he also cleaned up the mud that entangled Midoriya Izuku. If the plot of the comics was just like this, and the story ended happily, then the content of this episode with such a routine would definitely be ridiculed by readers, but don't underestimate the cartoonist Eiji Nizuma. The classmate who was saved by Izuku Midoriya thanked Izuku Midoriya in a way that reads as tsundere and writes as thank you, and then, the recently popular Oromand also appeared on Izuku Midoriya's way home. Boy, I'm here to thank you and correct you, and to propose a proposal." Oromand transformed into a skinny person again, standing in front of Izuku Midoriya and said slowly, "If it weren't for you, if I hadn't heard about your situation, I would have almost become a muscle man who talks but doesn't do anything. Thank you." No. This is my fault." In the face of his idol's thanks, Izuku Midoriya was not as excited as usual, but instead felt more guilty. "I hindered your work. I may no personality, but I said some self-righteous words." "That's right." Before Izuku Midoriya could finish his words, Oromand interrupted him and said, "Among all the people present, you, the timid and no quirk, are the only one who touched me deeply. Top heroes will leave some anecdotes since their school days, but most of them will summarize it like this, that is, the body has already acted before thinking." In the comics, Izuku Midoriya, with tears in his eyes, recalled what his mother had said to him before after hearing Oromanda's words. I'm sorry, Izuku." Recalling the scene when his mother hugged him and apologized while crying, Izuku Midoriya simply covered his chest and knelt down in front of Oromand. "You think so too?" Oromand asked, looking at Izuku Midoriya who was still crying. "No, mother, what I wanted to hear at that time was not this, but you will definitely become a hero." This was Oromand's answer to Izuku Midoriya's previous question after a silence, and it was also what Izuku Midoriya wanted to hear the most. The content of the second chapter of the manga My Hero Academia is titled Requirements to Become a Hero. When they first saw this title, many readers thought that it was given by Eiji Niizuma, a manga artist. It hints that the protagonist of the comic, Midoriya Izuku, will obtain something special in the content of this chapter and meet the conditions to become a hero. However, after reading the content of this chapter, many readers discovered that perhaps what Eiji Niizuma hinted at was more than that. The prerequisite for becoming a hero is to have unique abilities. It is impossible for ordinary people without special abilities to become heroes. Readers who have experienced many comics and novels have already regarded this truth as common sense. Not only that, in the common sense of many readers, those who dare to call themselves heroes without the cool special abilities of Kwangba have either burned out their brains or are suffering from paranoid delusions. But after observing the serialization of the second chapter of My Hero Academia, many readers fell into thinking. If the content of the second chapter of the comic My Hero Academia caused readers to reflect, then the comic One Punch Man that followed also told the same content in different forms, once again explaining it to the readers. What are the most basic conditions for becoming a hero? In the first chapter of the comic One Punch Man, the extremely powerful bald male protagonist appears in the second chapter. He is just a handsome guy with facial paralysis who has failed to find a job. No, the correct way to say it is, he is just a guy with no job. Anyone with special abilities. However, such an ordinary person, when he saw that the naughty child was about to be killed by the crab monster, he reacted immediately and saved the naughty child from the crab monster's killing move, even to protect the appearance. The frustrated naughty kid fought against the crab monster who killed many humans. Perhaps it was precisely because of this opportunity that the bald male protagonist would train hard to become the one who can defeat evil villains with one punch, and then he would lose his hair because he worked too hard. But for the man who was saved at that time for a naughty kid, a passerby who can step forward to save himself in critical moments is a hero in the true sense. What are the requirements for becoming a hero? Does it possess abilities that are unimaginable to humans? Do you still have the power to resolve all crises and defeat all evil? Or does it have an almost prophetic intelligence that can see through all schemes? No. That's not the case, right? When you see others in trouble and show signs of needing help, your body will react first and step forward before thinking. Only those with this courage and awareness are truly qualified to be called heroes. And this. It is also the most basic and important condition for becoming a hero. How many times has a certain cat cried while watching the episode Unyielding Justice in the Undocumented Night? A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 517. Like the readers, the cartoonists also carefully observe the comics serialized in the weekly magazine. Unlike the readers, when the cartoonists observe the comics, they do not simply observe the plot of the comics like the readers do, but also carefully analyze the advantages and disadvantages of the comics that are regarded as rivals. Although it sounds quite boring to observe the comics over and over again and analyze the plot, character setting and style of each comic, it is indeed a very necessary thing for cartoonists who want to catch up and surpass their goals. Being able to gain experience from others' successes and find one's own shortcomings from others' shortcomings is an evolution of biological instinct and a manifestation of great enterprising spirit. At least Yajo Mumanjai keeps moving forward and making progress in this way, and becomes a popular cartoonist in the weekly magazine Shonen Jump. If we didn't know the details, we would have thought that My Hero Academia and One Punch Man were created by the same person. The man with yellow hair and glasses put down the weekly magazine in his hand and complained to his good friend who was finishing the draft. Tisk, in a sense, those two guys with abnormal personalities, they really cooperated well. Is that so? But didn't Mr. Hattori say that according to the data from the reader survey, the comics of Makoto and Eiji were fighting fiercely? Landai stopped what he was doing, frowned and looked at his good friend, and asked in confusion, "This can also be considered as cooperation? I think they are just pulling each other back, right? If it weren't for the fact that the last two comics ended in a two-way defeat, the ending ended in a loss for both sides, I'm afraid the first place will have to be replaced." No, Supreme, the tacit cooperation I just mentioned does not refer to the results of the comics, but the plot of the comics. The yellow-haired man with glasses pushed his glasses while flipping through the weekly magazine, whether it is My Hero Academia or One Punch Man. When serializing the second episode, they chose very similar content, and even the ideas they want to convey are almost the same. Although the title of the second episode of the comic My Hero Academia is Conditions for Becoming a Hero, this title can actually be used in the second episode of the comic One Punch Man. So, hey, Supreme, if this is not considered tacit cooperation, then I don't know how to describe it. I said, Akito, is this the right time? Landai closed one eye and challenged his best friend quietly. Is the problem in the third chapter of the comic Hikaru no Go really irrelevant? Don't forget that Mr. Hattori has repeatedly emphasized before. Funny comics are not the style of the Aho Mumanjai I know, and evil comics are the kingly way of Aho Mumanjai, right? Before Landai could finish the rest of his words, the yellow-haired glasses guy immediately took over his best friend's words. Don't worry, I never planned to draw Hikaru no Go into a funny comic. But Akito, in the first two chapters of the comic Hikaru no Go, aren't there many jokes about Sai because he can't adapt to modern social life? Landai stared at his best friend with a smirk on his face, dissatisfied. Perhaps that's why Mr. Hattori is worried that we will turn Hikaru no Go into a funny comic, so he emphasized it again and again. Hey, Supreme, aren't you drawing the third episode now? Mr. Yellow-haired glasses didn't explain much to his friend's complaint. Since you have already started to complete the comic draft for the third episode, you should understand, right? This Hikaru no Go is not a funny comic. I understand, but I just think. Landai picked up the comic draft he had just completed and asked his friend, is this a little exaggerated? Exaggerated? No, not at all. Mr. Yellow-haired glasses only took a look at the comic draft and understood his friend's doubts. Sai's behavior, rather than being a normal reaction, it's the most exciting part of the third episode of Hikaru no Go. Since waking up, he has been pestering Hikaru to play Go. You should be able to feel Sai's obsession with Go, right? Seeing his good friend nod in agreement, the man with yellow hair and glasses smiled confidently. Then think about it, when someone like Sai, who is so obsessed with Go, after hundreds of years of waiting, finally gets to play Go again, using tears to express complex emotions such as excitement, sadness, melancholy, and emotion. Isn't it very reasonable and appropriate? This. Although Ah Cheng always says things that are difficult for ordinary people to understand, some of his words make sense if you think about it carefully. Under the puzzled gaze of his good friend, the man with yellow hair and glasses suddenly changed the topic to a certain middle school cartoonist. Although comics and Go are different, think about it. There was a period of time when we had to suspend publication because you were hospitalized. When you were discharged from the hospital and were finally able to pick up the brush to draw comics again, did you feel the same as Sai? Indeed. As Cheng said, comics are actually the product that reflects the soul of the cartoonist. The yellow-haired glasses man pushed up his glasses and suppressed the smile on his face. Hey, do you know, Supreme? After you are discharged from the hospital, when I was able to work with you again to draw comics and create comics with you as a jokey manjai again, my feelings were the same as those of Sai who was able to play chess again. That is to say. Classmate Lan Dai looked at his good friend who was getting more and more excited and turned his head unnaturally. Chi Ren, you just recalled the mood at that time, so you will the plot of the third episode of The Soul of Chess be designed like this? Yeah, that's it. The yellow-haired glasses man pushed up his glasses that were constantly emitting death rays at his good friends, and said slowly in an unusually solemn tone, everything you encounter in life, is a special experience. We record everything and continue to accumulate experience, engrave the things we encounter in the depths of our memories, engrave the people we meet in our souls, and build a unique world in our hearts. Also that when we create comics on a certain day of a certain year, a certain month, we can integrate everything into the comics, so that the unique inner world can be displayed in front of everyone, and interfere with the real world. Huh? Chi Ren, what are you talking about? Lan Dai looked at his good friend with disdain and decisively started the complaint mode. Why do I feel like, I'm not facing you now, but a certain second-rate person? This is the inherent barrier that Cheng said, ignoring the sad expression on his good friend's face. A certain man with yellow hair and glasses was already immersed in his own world. At that time, I heard when Cheng said these words, I laughed at that guy many times that he was hopeless, but now when I set foot on this level, I realized that the person who really should be laughed at was actually me. Yes, Kuga. Hey, classmate Lande, what kind of trouble are you trying to make with this hopeless look? Never give up. This is your good friend. Even if the infection by a middle-class cartoonist is truly hopeless, at least put on an expression that says I'm sorry, I've tried my best. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 518. Time soon came for the weekly editor to collect, the day to collect comic manuscripts. Taiwan Novel Network Rightward Arrow. Hattori editor, who had just received the comic manuscript from Jinghe River, began to head towards the Yashiro Mumanjai studio. However, this editor, who was always smiling and would hug his cartoonist and cry when he was moved, was frowning all the way. Next is, Yashiro Mumanjai's new series Hikaru no Go. If the editor of the Hattori department was just a little worried before, worried that Yashiro Mumanjai would define the style of Hikaru no Go as a funny comic, then, after receiving the comic manuscript of Assassination from Jinghe River, the Uncle Hattori editor had one more thing to worry about. I originally thought that the biggest rival of Aho Mumuha in this new series would be Hao Winkuma or Nyaizuma Eiji, but after reading the third episode of Shizukawa's new series Assassination, I realized that I was wrong. Hatsurai, who took over as the editor-in-chief of Shizukawa, naturally attributed the style of Shizukawa's cartoonist to Aho Mumuha, who is good at Evil Ways comics, based on his own understanding of the comic genre. However, After carefully observing Shizukawa's assassination, editor Hattori found that this comic, whose name sounds like Evil Ways, is not like the genre in the monthly magazine, with a heavy theme and a depressing style. Instead, it is a light-hearted and joyful comic. Of course, the comic assassination reflects some of the real society, such as the students with poor grades are uniformly assigned to Class E, which is much worse than other classes in terms of learning environment and classroom equipment. For example, the students in Class E are ridiculed and humiliated by other students in school. For example, the students in Class E have various low self-esteem and lack of confidence, etc. Being able to insert some metaphors of the cruel reality of society in a light-hearted comic is what makes Hattori editor most optimistic and valued. Jinghe River, who can create this comic in a short time, is indeed not to be underestimated. No, to be precise, all the new series this time are powerful enemies that cannot be underestimated for Ashiro Mumanjai. The type that Ashiro Mumanjai is good at is to reveal some overly mature thoughts in boys' comics. It is precisely because of this that Hattori editor was very optimistic about this new combination as early as when Ashiro Mumanjai first submitted the manuscript, and believed that this pair of good friends would one day surpass Nazuma Eiji and Takahashi Makoto. However, now the newly debuted Jinghe River has been discovered. This makes Hattori editor both happy and depressed. The happy thing is that with the stimulation of cartoonists of the same type, both Yashiro Mumanjai and Jinghe River can continue to make progress, and even develop the Evil Way comics to an extreme and push them to a new peak. The frustrating thing is that the cartoonists he was originally responsible for, as well as the newcomers he finally got, are all good at the non-mainstream Evil Way type comics in the weekly Shonen Jump. Hattori-san, I really can't tell. You have a face like a good old man, but the cartoonists you are in charge of are all good at evil comics. Could it be that you are the legendary good old man on the surface but extremely evil in the heart? Or, is this what Aiken usually said, in order to enhance the presence in the editorial department, you deliberately build your own attribute of contrasting cuteness? From this point of view alone, Hattori-san, you are also very hard-working. Hattori, the editor who walked to the door of Yachin Mumanjai studio, recalled the previous venomous jokes of his colleague Yoshida, and the whole person suddenly became a lot gloomy. It must be said that the burly Hattori editor, coupled with the temperament he showed at this moment, really meets the appetite of some people. For example, the gay couple next door to Yashiro Mumanjai who voluntarily entered the philosophical world because of Makoto Takahashi. For example, the education experts next door to Yashiro Mumanjai who spread the message that male blood should not be shed lightly, and for example, the forest fairies next door to Yashiro Mumanjai who appeared in urban legends, etc. He raised his hand and looked at his watch, confirming that it was exactly the time he had agreed with Yashiro Mumanjai. Worrying that other cartoonists are too strong is equivalent to doubting the cartoonists under your command. Praising the works of other cartoonists is equivalent to questioning the works of the cartoonists you are responsible for. Trust between people seems very reliable but is quite fragile. A careless word or a subconscious behavior may very likely destroy the trust that has been built with great difficulty. If you want to repair or rebuild this trust later, the price you have to pay, So as a qualified responsible editor, when Hattori editor was about to face Yashiro Mumanjai, he took a deep breath, put aside all the worries and doubts in his mind, put on a normal smile, and knocked on Yashiro Mumanjai's door. I did receive the content of the third chapter of the manga Hikaru no Go. How should I put it, if the time for Hattori editor to observe the manga is expressed as slightly longer, then the time for waiting for Hattori editor to evaluate Yashiro Mumanjai can be described as long. It's really a chapter that is completely beyond my expectations. Haha. Is this considered boasting? Looking at the satisfied smile on the face of the editor Hattori, Yachin Mumanjai and his good friends smiled at each other, and everything was self-evident. By the way, Landai and the man with yellow hair and glasses, you are all married people. You have wives, houses, and careers. Do you have to repeatedly show favorability to the Uncle Hattori editor? Have you really considered the feelings of your editor-in-chief? To be honest, I was worried that you guys would deviate from the style of this comic, but after seeing the content of this episode, I felt relieved. Hee, editor Hattori sighed as he sorted out the comic manuscript. From the seemingly funny content in the first 2 episodes, the gradual transition to the touching content in this episode, everything looks very natural, and there is no sense of deliberateness. Takagi-kun, and Mashiro-kun, compared to when you first debuted, you have indeed been growing and improving. Ahahaha, of course. People always grow up slowly as they get older. Mr. Yellow-haired Glasses looked at his good friend, and after brushing each other's favorability again, they said in unison, of course, except for a certain Chuyuni Makoto. Just as the good friends Yashiro Mumanjai and the Hattori editor were about to discuss the comic with the Hattori editor, Landai's cell phone rang. It's an email from Ah Cheng. Landai flipped open his cell phone, and after seeing the sender's name, he looked at his best friend with a guilty conscience, and asked uncertainly, that guy Ah Cheng, could it be that he felt that we were talking behind his back, so he chose to send the email at this time? Jeez Hang, you think too much. This is just a coincidence. It's just a coincidence. Huang Mao Glasses smiled awkwardly, shaking his hands to cover up the reason for sending the email. I'm afraid he suddenly wanted to do something weird again. Probably like this. Landai said as he casually opened the email. Then, after seeing the content of the email, Landai showed a surprised look on his face and exclaimed in disbelief. Hey. Hey. How is it possible? Because he was curious about his best friend's performance, Huang Mao Glasses also stretched his head to observe the content of the email. As a result, Huang Mao Glasses was even worse than Landai's best friend, and he became stuttering when speaking. The 3rd chapter is full of emotion. Sigh, did you cry? This is the content of the email just sent by a certain Chuyuni cartoonist. I thought I would feel more relaxed after New Year's Day, but it seems that it was just a certain cat's illusion. Dear readers, please rest early, that's all. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 519. Except for Ajumu who has just completed the 3rd chapter of the manga Ghost, all the mangaka who participated in Super Smash Bros. This time received the almost prophetic email from Makoto Takahashi. Silver-haired brother Fukuda, will Dio-kun finally put on the stone mask and give up his human identity? This is an email sent to the silver-haired brother Fukuda. Hey, little sea otter, how are you preparing for the hunter exam? 2 naughty boys with overflowing passion have met. This is the email sent by Makoto Takahashi to his devout believer, Little Sea Otter. Ruko, it is said that Koro-sensei's tentacle touch head kill has the ability to greatly increase favorability. Have you ever used it on Aoi Ueno and the cute Mayuri? The result of the personal test is whether Mayuri holds her head is enabled. What about the good ship branch line, or the Ueno Aoi blackened hatchet branch line? This is an email sent by a middle-class cartoonist who is burning with gossip, claiming to be a disciple. King of Black Flame, congratulations to Izuku Midoriya, the little freckled male protagonist, who has finally evolved from mortal bones to a hero. Although I really want to say this, don't forget the railgun you are responsible for. Eccentric anything like that is absolutely not allowed. This is Makoto Takahashi's friendly reminder to Shinizuma AG as an ally not to neglect the monthly serialization of Makoto Shinkai because he is busy with the creation of the manga My Hero Academia. The whole process of Makoto Takahashi sending emails was not restrained and concealed by the arrival of Yoshida, who received the manga manuscript. Instead, a certain second-level cartoonist explained the information contained in each email to Yoshida one by one. However, Takahashi-Cheng's attitude is more unscrupulous than showing off. Use reasonable intelligence to speculate on what may happen in the future, and at the critical moment after 2 rounds, give the opponent the most fatal blow. This move is a superpower skill called Predict the Future. While Xiao Cheng was sending an email on his mobile phone, he said to Yoshida, who kept twitching at the corner of his mouth. Apart from super-powered Pokemon, the only ones who can master this kind of skill are people like me who have awakened future tense exists. So my beloved cat, as a mere human being, don't hold on to the impossible belief that sooner or later I will master this skill as long as I practice hard. Ha 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 ha. This kind of idiotic belief, I will not have it now, and I will definitely not have it in the future. Looking at Makoto Takahashi, who was laughing wildly, Yoshida curled his lips in disdain and complained loudly. Because he recalled the dark history of being tricked by a certain middle-class cartoonist, Yoshida just took the manga manuscript of the third chapter of the manga One Punch Man and did not look through it as anxiously as before. Instead, he was a little confused. Looking at Makoto Takahashi, he joked with a tone of schadenfreude, "Speaking of Chang, are you sure you are really a man by doing this? Can you really guarantee that the other 5 cartoonists you speculated will submit the third serialization this time? Is the content of the words accurate? If there is any deviation in your prediction, humph, I am looking forward to seeing such a scene. My beloved cat, you are saying this to me who has a plug-in and can see through the future with the magic eye future tense. You are still at the level of mortal wisdom." Regarding Yoshida Yan's face, Makoto Takahashi was quite unhappy with the expectations revealed in his words. If even this level of predictions were wrong, then I would have died at the hands of a murderer wandering around the city one night. If it weren't for the anti-mysterious attire of a white coat and divination, if the teacher's compatibility is seriously unfavorable, maybe there is no crazy cartoonist Hohoin Kuma in this world, but only the mysterious fortune-teller Hohoin Kuma. Since Chen, you have guessed the plot of other people's comics, can you win the first place in this reader survey? Although it is indeed unpleasant to be ridiculed and complained by Makoto Takahashi, but after all, Yoshida is the editor-in-chief of the manga artist Shoin Yoshima, and he still has a very sense of responsibility when talking about manga-related matters. So, don't underestimate Yoshida as the editor-in-chief. According to the theory of know yourself and know the enemy, you can fight 100 battles without danger. Yoshida felt that since Takahashi Makoto could guess the contents of other comic strips, he should naturally have countermeasures. However, after Takahashi Makoto pondered for a moment, he shook his head with regret. He shook his head, and although he hadn't answered Yoshida's words yet, the meaning he wanted to express was already obvious. Why? Because he hasn't read the manga One Punch Man yet. Yoshida doesn't have any basis for prediction at the moment, so, although Yoshida is a little helpless and reluctant, now he can only turn to a certain middle-class manga artist who seems to have everything under control. Logically speaking, Chen, since you already know the plots of other comics, you should be prepared. How could? My beloved cat, when I proposed the great brawl to the commander, I said it before, at that time, I said, we want to have an upright frontal fight, right? Makoto Takahashi Yoshida stopped Yoshida, who was about to say something, with his eyes, and tapped the unfinished comic manuscript on the table with his fingers. So even if I know that a certain chapter of other comics will be particularly exciting, I will not prepare anything specially, so, it's the same this time. I understand what you mean. In your opinion, Chang, because you have guessed the content of the third chapter of other comics, you feel that you are not victorious. Is there anything wrong with this? Yoshida saw after Makoto Takahashi nodded in acquiescence. He immediately said the words he had prepared before, but being able to speculate on the subsequent plot development of the manga based on the current serialized content, in a sense, this kind of behavior is actually not its cheating, but it belongs to your talent, Chang. Can you? No, the correct term should be talent. God knows why Yoshida can say words of comfort and encouragement while also madly complaining about Makoto Takahashi's capricious and changeable character in his heart. Being able to see through your opponent's intentions and deduce the opponent's next move is a very amazing ability. Chen, you have spent your time interpreting other cartoonists' comics and spent time thinking about and guessing the subsequent plots of other comics, so if you use this ability, even if you really win, it is definitely not the so-called victory without force. Realizing that a certain Chiyuni manga artist had suddenly gone wrong, after asking for the reason, Yoshida originally planned to take the opportunity to make a guest appearance as a spiritual guide or a spiritual mentor to save the Chiyuni manga artist who was lost on the road of life. Or to enlighten Makoto Takahashi who thinks too much. The opportunity was indeed used perfectly, and the persuasion also achieved outstanding results in practice, but the result? Actually, this is just a trivial problem. Makoto Takahashi's words at this moment made Yoshida feel so depressed that he vomited blood. More importantly, the reason why I chose to do this is to try my best to retain my expectations and fears about the unknown. If possible, Yoshida really wants to drag out a certain middle-class cartoonist and shoot him for 5 hours at this moment. My beloved cat, a mortal like you won't understand. Maybe it's because Yoshida's contemptuous eyes are too strong, or maybe it's because Takahashi Makoto suddenly entered the life emotion mode. In short, this time before Yoshida had time to ask, Takahashi Makoto had already started talking to himself. Having fear and expectation for the unknown is an indispensable and important condition for the survival of highly intelligent creatures such as humans. What is indispensable for survival shouldn't be material resources such as food and water, right? An editor in charge asked seriously, but was met with a look of contempt by a middle-grade cartoonist. Speaking of Yoshida, don't you understand now? If you want to communicate normally with Makoto Takahashi, according to the principle of equivalent exchange, the price you have to pay is to abandon the so-called common sense. Being afraid of the unknown, we can always remember our existence as mortals, and not be too arrogant when we are proud. Only by having expectations for the unknown, can we be able to live in a long life in the endless trial called life. Keep working hard towards hope. Makoto Takahashi smiled at the already sluggish Yoshida, and continued to inflict the famous persecution of mental torture on his editor-in-chief. Although some people are still alive, they are walking like zombies because they have lost their fear and expectation of the unknown. However, although some people have died, their ideas have been passed down and their spirits will still last forever. So my beloved cat, you understand now. What I am more afraid of and worried about is spiritual death. What you said, Chang, makes sense. Even though it was only for a moment, Yoshida's brain still crashed for a while due to overload. But, does this have anything to do with the comics we're discussing? Of course, Makoto Takahashi looked at the troubled Yoshida and felt happy, with a satisfied smile on his face. Guess the subsequent plots of other comics, and then take the targeted approach of avoiding bullying. The strategy: if I really do this, I will reach the state of I have no opponent before me. But at the same time, that will also be the time when the real death of the mad cartoonist Phoenix Institute comes. The gap between worldviews is really insurmountable. My familiar cat, let me give you a hint. Makoto Takahashi pointed to the manga manuscript of One Punch Man in Yoshida's hand. After you have read the content of the third chapter, if you still have any questions, then, the Phoenix Academy Jujhen, who is affiliated with the Kanki Psychological Consultation Room, will serve you wholeheartedly. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 520. My beloved cat, although your serious and responsible attitude is worthy of praise, please don't make the same mistake again. Just as Yoshida picked up the comic manuscript and prepared to enter the appreciation mode, Takahashi Makoto's sinister voice also sounded. Last time you tried to find the name of the bald male protagonist, but failed. You should not have forgotten the lesson afterwards. So are you going to challenge this task again today? Before that, I want to confirm first, Chang, did you really reveal the name of the male protagonist in the comic manuscript of this episode? It seems that Yoshida has already understood the principle of learning from one's mistakes very well. Before even flipping through the comic manuscript, he directly confirmed with the comic author himself. If you didn't announce it in this episode, even if I read it carefully, it wouldn't work. Tisk. Unpleasant. Finding that his trap had been seen through, Takahashi Makoto curled his lips in dissatisfaction, stared at Yoshida with a little surprise, and muttered uncertainly, "Isn't it said that non-protagonists other than Saint Seiya are not immune to the same trick? Why this time, speaking of my cat, when did you change your job? And you can hide your breath so well, this is not something that can be done overnight." I didn't continue to pay attention to Takahashi Makoto's plan, because at this moment Yoshida has already started to look through the content of the third episode of One Punch Man in his hand. Using the excuse of "I want to observe the comics carefully" at this moment, Yoshida was finally able to avoid Takahashi Makoto's mental destruction. Congratulations. Congratulations. Under the pretext of "I want to observe the comics carefully" at this moment, Yoshida slightly delayed the compulsory psychological counseling plan that a certain Chuyuni cartoonist was looking forward to. Congratulations. Congratulations. Under the pretext of "I want to observe the comics carefully" at this moment, Yoshida once again embarked on the journey of finding the name of a certain bald male protagonist. Congratulations, no, because this made the editor-in-charge recall the dark memory of being tricked by a certain Chuyuni cartoonist, which is not worth saying congratulations at all. In fact, Yoshida had read the contents of the first 6 episodes of One Punch Man long before the comics entered the weekly serialization. It's just that the comic manuscript that Yoshida observed at that time was called the original version by a certain Chuyuni cartoonist, that is, the version with a magical style. At that time, the comic manuscript that was not even a storyboard, Yoshida, as a senior editor-in-charge, did observe it carefully under the coercion of Makoto Takahashi, but at that time, Yoshida only read the contents of the first episode of the comics. The third episode starts with a pair of brothers. The elder brother is an inventor, and the younger brother is a workout maniac. In order to become the strongest man in the world, the younger brother works hard every day, and the elder brother, a scientist, is like the crazy scientists in many novels and comics, and wants to rule the world through some strange inventions. According to the plots of comics observed in the past, according to Yoshida's experience as the editor-in-charge, generally such scientists who are seeking death will either be eliminated by the protagonist and the members of the protagonist's side in the middle of the plan or at a critical moment, or because of the author's great will, these people's luck values are lower than that of the spearmen, so that these crazy or evil plans will collapse for various reasons. In simple terms, bad people have no human rights and no luck. So just by observing the opening part of the comic, Yoshida has already had a rough guess about the direction of the next plot. However, when Yoshida turned to the next page of the comic manuscript, he was surprised to find that the scientist brother actually succeeded. He actually invented a magical potion that can strengthen humans. Moreover, the younger brother, who only knew how to exercise, after drinking the potion, turned into a huge muscular brother giant. Ignoring the funny dialogue between the brothers in the comics, Yoshida frowned, and his hand that was flipping the comic manuscript paused for a moment, because the development of this plot was somewhat beyond Yoshida's expectations. The younger brother, who turned into a super muscular brother giant, under the command of the crazy scientist, began a crazy journey of destruction. With one foot down, half of the city was trampled. The palm wind brought by a casual palm destroyed several high-rise buildings, and also brought hundreds of thousands of casualties to humans. Is this really a hero comic, not a disaster comic? Looking at the information revealed in the words of the scientist when he boasted about his brother's achievements in the comics, Yoshida couldn't help but have such doubts. Just as the two brothers who were wreaking havoc on the city were immersed in this exaggerated power, the mad scientist standing on his brother's right shoulder discovered that there was also a person standing on the other side, that is, on his brother's left shoulder. Eh? That bald guy, has he appeared before? Through the dialogue in the comics, Yoshida looked back uncertainly, but found that just as the mad scientist in the comics said, the bald male protagonist had already appeared before, but he just didn't notice it at the time. He really appeared. Speaking of the setting and processing of this detail, this kind of usual carefulness, and the bad taste that can be seen everywhere. It's really Aiken's usual style. Put on your underwear, in the comic, a bald man standing on the shoulder of the super-muscular brother giant suggested with a smile that deserved a beating. Looking at the male protagonist's smile and expression, as well as the shining bald head, not to mention the super-muscular brother giant and his brother in the comic, even Yoshida, who is the comic observer, has the idea of suddenly wanting to beat this dead bald man hard. The comic One Punch Man seems to enter a period of sage time after the male protagonist appears. No, it should be funny time. For example, when the bald male protagonist first appeared and faced the vaccine man, he first looked disgusted with the vaccine man's chatterbox, and then after he defeated the vaccine man with one punch, he complained that the vaccine man was not strong enough and was defeated by his own punch. For example, when the male protagonist was not bald before, whether he faced the crab monster or the ugly-looking bear child, he would complain like a funny guy. And the comic draft of the third episode seems to continue this style. The super muscle brother giant who just brutally destroyed the city and caused a lot of killings, under the order of his mad scientist brother kill the person standing on the shoulder, actually killed his brother by mistake. The bald male protagonist who should have been killed, while the giant was wailing and roaring, covered his ears and put on a very slapping smile. Before turning the next page of the comic manuscript, Yoshida took a deep breath, then secretly glanced at Takahashi Makoto who was busy completing the comic manuscript, then held his breath and turned the next page of the comic manuscript. The reason why Yoshida did this was naturally because of the next plot of the comic. Because according to the pattern of the first two episodes of One Punch Man, the next plot is naturally what Yoshida expected, the fierce fight between the male protagonist who still hasn't revealed his name and the super muscle brother giant. The super muscular brother giant first grabbed the bald male protagonist standing on his shoulders with both hands and threw him to the ground, then he jumped high and stomped on him hard, then he punched at a very fast speed, even leaving an afterimage, and kept hitting the bald male protagonist lying in the deep pit. This fighting scene, this inexplicable sense of familiarity, could it be that comic, looking at some of the actions of the super muscular brother giant in the comic draft, the corners of the mouth of a responsible editor began to twitch constantly, because Yoshida saw some familiar scenes. This part of the fight scene is difficult to draw, so I refer to the style of some other comics. Takahashi Makoto, who appeared next to Yoshida at some point, suddenly said, "Well, my beloved cat, it's just as you guessed, don't show that unbelievable look. This scene is the comic you thought of. I remember that you seemed to have served as the editor-in-chief of that adult before." It turned out to be true. Yoshida was a little amused by Takahashi Makoto's shameless admission. "Aiken, you have drawn this kind of fight scene before, is it necessary to imitate it so deliberately?" "I just want to use comics to pay tribute to that adult. I am just paying my respects to you, my lord." Hey, I remember you just, that's not what you said just now, Cheng. Tisk, my beloved cat, have you reached the age where you start to doubt your life? It is said that humans know that at this time, life is like a candle in the wind. My beloved cat, you are really pitiful. Hey, this is a curse. You are definitely cursing me. No, I am just telling you some common sense that you don't know, that's all. The two of them ended with Makoto Takahashi winning a great victory. Yoshida naturally continued to observe the comic manuscript in his hand, while Makoto Takahashi also began to complete his unfinished comic manuscript. In fact, the comic manuscript that Yoshida wanted to observe only had one page of content left. Overwhelming power, is actually very boring. The bald male protagonist who was beaten by the super muscle brother giant in the previous comic suddenly jumped out of the deep pit and punched the super muscle brother giant. And then, there was nothing else. There was no fierce fighting scene. the big bald man who suddenly jumped out of the city ruins defeated the super muscle brother giant with just one punch, just like the vaccine man was blown up in the first episode of this comic. This time the bald male protagonist also defeated the enemy with just one punch. But this time the bald male protagonist did not complain like in the first episode. Because this time, the super muscle brother giant, as the villain, destroyed the B-City set in the comic again because of his huge body when he fell. Although Yoshida read the content of the third episode of the comic One Punch Man very seriously and carefully, he did not spend too much time. On the one hand, it was because the plot of this episode was very simple. On the other hand, although some of the plot developments in the third episode were indeed beyond Yoshida's expectations, the excitement did not meet Yoshida's expectations. Overwhelming power, boring, fear of the unknown, and expectation. Recalling the last scene of this comic, Yoshida looked up at a middle school manga artist who was working hard on the comic draft. Yoshida opened his mouth, but finally chose to remain silent. However, Yoshida has somewhat understood what Takahashi Makoto meant by what he said before. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 521. Just as Makoto Takahashi said, the plot contents of the third chapters of several new serials published in this weekly are quite brutal. The results of the third chapter of the comic One Punch Man are just as predicted by Makoto Takahashi, and they are not very good. Although compared to those comics that are on the verge of being cut in half, ranking 7th this time is considered a good result, but it fell directly from the 2nd position to 7th place. Such a significant drop in ranking is still make Yoshida a little depressed. Sure enough, this is the result. Looking at the results from the reader survey, Yoshida muttered with some reluctance, although I had been mentally prepared before, but when I actually faced it, it was still a little hard to accept. The third episode of Shinsumakun this time has also dropped to 6th place. The one with the same depressed tone as Yoshida was naturally the silver-haired brother Fukuda and the editor-in-chief of Shinsuma Eiji, Yujiro. The editor-in-chief, who had frequent exchanges with Yoshida on the editorial side, was holding the statistics sheet of the reader survey tightly, and his face no longer had the confident look of the past. The most regrettable thing this time is probably Fukuda. Is it Jun's third chapter? It's rare that Fukuda-kun is very serious and hard-working this time, and even boldly changed the comic plot into a fantasy genre, but the result is only ranked 5th, but he was able to achieve such a result after his sudden transformation. In a sense, this transformation of comics can be considered a success. Both the comics by Mr. Kuma from the Phoenix Institute and the comics by Mr. Eiji Shinzuma look quite interesting. The reason why the score of the third chapter dropped this time is probably to foreshadow the plot arrangements in the future, right? Haha, editor Hattori, who put down the reader survey sheet, also joined in the conversation, and what surprises me is that this time the comic JoJo is actually a hot-blooded fantasy comic, and the 5th place is also achieved. Quite good. Boldly trying to break through the style you are good at is really in line with Mr. Fukuda's style. Yoshida put down the reader survey score sheet in his hand and stared at his colleague Hattori, who intervened in the conversation with a smile, and remained silent. Yujiro also behaved similarly to Yoshida. Speaking of Yoshida and Yujiro, who usually hurt each other with complaints when they disagree, your synchronicity rate is incredible now. Should we say that you two deserve to be the co-editors of the manga artist Shinkai Makoto? Hey, Yujiro-san, I heard that the third episode of Soul of the Game this time succeeded in taking the first place. What do you mean I heard? On the reader survey sheet in your hand, Yoshida, isn't it written? Is it very clear? Yes, Yoshida-san, I heard that the third episode of Assassination suddenly jumped to the 2nd place. Although Yujiro was smiling, there was resentment in his tone, etc. By the way, Yuajiro, what the hell is that black energy lingering behind you? This time it's just that the comics of Ajumuman-kun and Shizuka-kun are a bit exciting. Sensing that his two colleagues seemed to have thorns in their words, Hattori's editor became more careful when speaking, and even I don't dare to use my favorite catchphrase anymore. After all, to a certain extent, the power of ridicule of the ending catchphrase like haha is really too strong. Noble editors, please respect yourself. Yoshida made a sharp complaint using vocabulary that was difficult for Hattori editors to understand. Capitalist editor, please silence me. Yujiro, who instantly understood the meaning of Yoshida's complaint, also performed a magical last-ditch attack. Aristocratic, capitalistic, editor. Me, editor Hattori looked at his two colleagues with some confusion, pointed at himself and asked, although I can feel your resentment, but these words don't seem to be the same. Very suitable to describe me, right? Because a certain trajectory series has not appeared in this world, the demon title of a certain Kesha bandit leader has naturally not been widely spread. Editor Hattori will naturally not know the malice contained in these two modified titles. After all, editor Hattori does not have as much contact with a certain middle-class cartoonist as his two colleagues. Hey, Yoshida, Yujiro, and the Monopoly editor, finish your work before chatting. After years of practice, the editor-in-chief of Bottle finally inherited and understood the secret of the former editor-in-chief Sasaki must-kill light glasses, and recommended the movements of the glasses were full of powerful intimidation, especially Yoshida. Please keep an eye on Mr. Hiromaru's manga manuscript. Hey. Leave Hiromaru-kun to me, editor-in-chief. Yoshida showed a sinister smile. It can be predicted that the little sea otter will live a very miserable life in the next period of time. I will go to AG Arizuma to collect the manga manuscript of Railgun. Seeing the editor-in-chief of Bottle turn his attention from Yoshida to himself, Yujiro immediately made a prediction in advance quite consciously. He picked up the phone, shook it, and stammered an explanation to the editor-in-chief of the Bottle. It seems that the monthly magazine has started to push for manuscripts. Even the editor-in-chief. Although editor Hattori was not named, as for the previous title of editor-in-chief of Bottle, editor Hattori, as an uncle, why don't you go to the smoking area and smoke quietly for a while? Yoshida, who had just left the office and walked out of the building, saw a middle-grade cartoonist wearing a white coat, standing at the gate and having a mysterious phone call with an unknown being. As expected, there is a barrier at the gathering place, real man. It's just a barrier of dispersion of idle people. How can it stop the arrogant demon god of Phoenix Academy? Are you looking down on me, miscellaneous cultivator? Speaking of which, shouldn't Takahashi Makoto be staying at home and working hard to complete the manga draft at this time? Yoshida's mouth twitched, and he raised his hand to look at his watch. He was extremely surprised that Takahashi Makoto would appear in front of him at this time. I said Aiken. Tisk, yes, the minions of the organization discovered it. After hearing Yoshida's call, Takahashi Makoto turned around and saw a surprised Yoshida. A helpless look immediately appeared on his face, and he covered it with his hands. He spoke into the phone in a low voice just enough for Yoshida to hear. If I don't contact you after half an hour, it means that I am no longer in this world. If it is true, if something like this happens, please help me take care of Rin and the witch after the world is destroyed. CG. I will send that guy to another world to perform the Devil King's awakening ritual before leaving this world. Yeah, that's it. El Psychongru. Are you talking to people from other dimensions again? Yoshida walked up to Takahashi Makoto, patted Takahashi Makoto's shoulder and asked, I say Chen, can you explain why you appeared at this time? Where are you? SHH, Makoto. Takahashi gestured to Yoshida to be silent, then looked around vigilantly, and then whispered, the witch's recent behavior has been a bit abnormal, and her mind has been disturbed by visual inspection. I suspect that this matter is mysterious. The other side is instigating from behind, so. I understand. Looking at Makoto Takahashi's solemn look, Yoshida, after a brief silence, covered his forehead, raised his head and sighed. It seems that the cartoonist who completed the manga manuscript needs to be supervised. It's not just here, American. My beloved cat, you guy, don't you feel something abnormal in the flow of the Earth's breath? These may be the precursors of those guys on the mysterious side who want to conquer the world. Cheng, you guy. After feeling that the pedestrians around him started to watch and whisper, Yoshida could no longer care about the difference in force and prepared to forcefully evacuate with Makoto Takahashi. You know, this is the editor's side of the weekly magazine Base Camp. If you are surrounded by people because of a certain secondary comic book, you will definitely be ridiculed by your colleagues tomorrow. Don't underestimate the speed of news spreading in the era of the information explosion. I can tease and ridicule my colleagues because I have the vicious tongue attribute. But as the target of ridicule, this is something Yoshida absolutely cannot tolerate. To a certain extent, people with such a bad character are all beings who appear to be S but actually belong to M but think they are S. Huh? This is. Just when Yoshida was about to drag Takahashi Makoto away, Takahashi Makoto suddenly exclaimed, and then before Yoshida had time to react, he got the reader survey sheet that Yoshida accidentally exposed. Stat sheet. The seventh one. Cheng, I originally planned to tell you later. Since Takahashi Cheng already knew in advance, Yoshida had nothing to hide. He spread his hands to Takahashi Cheng and sighed helplessly. As you can see, the content score of the third episode has indeed dropped, but it doesn't matter, this is just an accidental phenomenon, so. Huh? My beloved cat, do you think I will be hit by this and then fall into a depressed state, waiting for comfort from a stupid existence like you? Makoto Takahashi interrupted unceremoniously. Yoshida's words showed a look of contempt and disgust on his face. Huh? It's just a cat belonging to me. Don't underestimate the arrogant manga artist Hohoin Ajin-sama. Yes, I don't dare to underestimate you, Cheng. Having worked with Makoto Takahashi for many years as the editor-in-chief, Yoshida naturally knows that Makoto Takahashi has a strong heart, so of course such a small thing as the decline in comics performance is not a problem. It will not affect Makoto Takahashi, therefore, the reason why Yoshida said this deliberately was to divert Makoto Takahashi's attention. But Aiken, the content of the next chapter. The comfort plan didn't succeed, and then the battle plan was immediately changed. Do you want to instigate me to fight for the first place? Huh, it's just the wisdom of my beloved cat. Seeing Yoshida hesitate to speak, Takahashi Makoto naturally guessed out of his thoughts as the editor-in-charge. He interrupted the other party's unfinished words angrily. Although it is commendable to know how to use the situation to persuade, but my beloved cat, don't underestimate other existences. Eh? Could it be that Cheng, you want to be like that in the third episode again? Speaking of this matter, Yoshida instantly burst into resentment. I don't care if Cheng is trying to maintain your awe and expectation for the unknown, or to satisfy your bad taste. Since you can guess the plots of other cartoonists' comics, let's come up with countermeasures. Yada. 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 If you really do that, you will lose a lot of fun, and my soul will gradually wither and fail due to lack of pleasure. It can make Yoshida ignore the gap in force and have the idea of dividing the second-year manga artist in white coat in front of him into 17 parts. This excuse of Makoto Takahashi should be said to be very good and powerful. But speaking of my cat, do you think the title of the next chapter should be Protect the Earth or A Bald Man's Dream? Of course, seeing Takahashi Makoto suddenly change the title of the next chapter of the comic One Punch Man, Yoshida suddenly reacted after a moment of hesitation, and finally showed a meaningful smile on his face. Aiken, it seems that I can now look forward to the results of the fourth chapter. Tisk, why does this sound like some kind of flag? Speaking of my cat, please don't mess with me, Takahashi Makoto, is this considered tsundere? Although it is fun to fight in an upright manner, I will be very depressed if I always lose. Then why are you still wasting time here? Go home and draw the fourth chapter of the comic draft, you bastard. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 522. Yoshida, who escorted Takahashi Makoto home to draw comics, stayed by the side of Little Otter for the next 3 days, watching and supervising Little Otter to complete the new serialized comic manuscript. Before, Editor-in-Chief Pingzi had specifically reminded Yoshida to pay attention to Little Otter, who might have escape and hiding syndrome at any time. Originally, according to Yoshida's arrangement, after reporting to the weekly editorial headquarters in the morning, he should have rushed to Little Otter as soon as possible. After all, according to Little Otter's habit, if he started serializing long comics in the weekly without his own supervision, he would definitely be passive and lazy, and even have the idea of not wanting to complete the comic manuscript and embarking on a escape journey. You know, the reason why Little Otter and Makoto Takahashi and others are serializing in the weekly magazine this time, in addition to the instigation of a certain Chuyuni cartoonist, is largely because the previous serialized comics were cut off, and then Yoshida had to do it under various threats and inducements. As for the reason why the comics were cut off, it was naturally because the comics were not submitted on time every week, which caused a sharp drop in reader support. However, Yoshida's schedule today was completely disrupted by a call from a certain Chuyuni cartoonist. What? The comics for the fourth episode, Chen, you have finished it. Hearing the news from Makoto Takahashi on the other end of the phone, Yoshida was so surprised that he jumped up from his chair. That's it, I said, Chen, you are not fooling me, huh? Then I'll go over now. Seeing Yoshida running away in a panic after hanging up the phone, a certain sea urchin editor, Uncle Hattori, just picked up the tea on the table and took a sip, and then laughed hee hee. A certain servant editor, Yujiro, was on the phone with a weak face. It is certain that the person Yujiro is talking to at this moment is not Nazuma Eiji but the silver-haired brother Fukuda, because only when talking to the silver-haired brother Fukuda, Yujiro will show an awkward smile and act so weak. As for most of the editors in the headquarters of the weekly editorial side, they showed envy and jealousy for the performance of Yoshida and others, because recently, the cartoonists under Yoshida and others, that is, Takahashi Makoto and others who belong to the Fukuda group, have shown overwhelming combat effectiveness and are a bit too active. Since the big brawl planned by Takahashi Makoto was launched in the weekly magazine, other comics serialized in the weekly magazine have been affected to varying degrees. In addition to some old brand comics that have accumulated a lot of popularity and good reputation due to long-term serialization and can stabilize their own status, other comics that have not been serialized for a long time or have average popularity and reputation are crushed by the 6 newly serialized comics. There are even several comics that have been on the verge of being cut off before. Because of the impact of this big brawl, they are directly listed as confirmed to be cut off. Comics. If cartoonists feel depressed because of the decline in the performance of their comics, or even because their comics are cut short, then the editors in charge of these cartoonists can be described as extremely depressed, right? Every week, they carefully select some good comics from the vast amount of submissions, then meet with the cartoonists to communicate, submit these good comics to the serialization meeting, and finally try their best to get a chance to be serialized. As a result, because of this big fight planned by a middle school cartoonist, most of the efforts made by the editors in charge on the editorial side have been wasted, and these editors in charge can't blame anything. After all, the poor performance of the comics, even to the point of being cut short, is not because the comics of the cartoonists under their command are not good enough, but because the opponents are too strong, and they choose to serialize at this time. I'm afraid there is nothing more depressing than this, right? Of course, this world still abides by the principle of equivalent exchange. As the 3 editors who are envied, jealous and hated, they also face a lot of troubles. For example, Yoshida has to deal with a certain Chuyuni cartoonist who is difficult to communicate with, and supervise a little sea otter with a escape habit. For example, Yojiro has to deal with his new wife Eiji who has a whim from time to time, and the silver-haired brother Fukuda who has recently awakened to the special hobby of violent intimidation. For example, Uncle Hattori has to deal with Aho Mumha who brushes each other's gay diamond suit friend diamond suit close diamond suit degree diamond suit, and the taciturn Jinghe River who always fantasizes about being recognized as a disciple by a certain Chuyuni cartoonist. In short, you envy, jealous and hate me in various ways, but you don't know the various bitter and bloody stories behind me. How long does it take to complete a comic draft? Yoshida has been thinking about this question on his way to Takahashi Makoto's house. According to the practice of general cartoonists, after conceiving the plot of an episode, they will first draw a storyboard, that is, to express the previously conceived plot content in the form of a storyboard. Of course, while completing the storyboard, different cartoonists will also complete the general composition of the comic according to their own style. For the same comic plot of character-to-character duel, some cartoonists will use different perspectives and several storyboards to draw comics that give readers room for imagination, while some cartoonists like to complete it in one go and show all the fighting scenes to the readers. This is a bit like the novels of Master Jin and Master Gu. When Master Jin describes the duel between martial artists, he usually describes the moves and martial arts in great detail, one move at a time, attack and defense, and pick and roll. The reader only needs to read carefully to roughly imagine it through the lines of the text, but Master Gu is different. The moves and artistic conception are just to the point, and the description is made from multiple angles. As for the specific scenes, it is entirely up to the reader's imagination. The different styles of novels lead to complex and simple descriptions of the same plot, and the same reason, the different styles of comics naturally require different numbers of comic drafts. If the content of the third episode of the comic One Punch Man is used as a reference standard, Yoshida finds it hard to believe that Makoto Takahashi will complete the content of the fourth episode in such a short time. Apart from the monthly serial comic drafts that Makoto Takahashi needs to complete every day, it has only been 3 days since Yoshida escorted a certain middle school cartoonist back home from the editorial headquarters to complete the comic draft. Complete the comic manuscript of the fourth episode of One Punch Man within 3 days. Even if Makoto Takahashi had already completed the storyboard, even if Makoto Takahashi's drawing speed was very fast, it was still impossible. Humph. My cat, don't use the standards of you stupid ants to measure the crazy cartoonist How Winkuma. Makoto Takahashi put the finished comic manuscript in front of Yoshida who looked unbelievable, and laughed triumphantly. Now you see it? My How Winkuma's sky-breaking fighting power. Ha 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 ha. Before that, Chen, you should look in the mirror first. Yoshida didn't want to imitate Edward to scold the colonel. He was just worried about a certain middle school cartoonist, that's all. I said, you can actually finish a comic draft in 3 days, as expected. In order to complete the 4th chapter of the comic draft, you stayed up late again, didn't you, Cheng? Tisk. Have you been seen through? The exposed Takahashi Makoto turned his head away unhappily and muttered softly, it seems that I have underestimated you recently, my cat. Hey, Cheng, the tired look on your face, and the dark circles under your eyes, you can tell these things at a glance. Ding ding Ji-san, the rest is up to you. Takahashi Makoto ignored Yoshida's complaints and turned to Uncle Ding Ding beside him and said, I have to go to the street tonight to discuss life with the killer who appears at 12 o'clock midnight, so, you know. Hey, Cheng, have a good rest, and leave the rest to me. Uncle Ding Ding watched Takahashi go while Cheng entered the bedroom, picked up a pile of comics that Yoshida looked familiar with from the bookshelf, and came to Yoshida. Speaking of Ding Ding, the one in your hand. Yoshida did not take the comic from Uncle Ding Ding immediately. Instead, after a moment of hesitation, he asked in an uncertain tone, could it be that? Although Cheng said that this is the real comic of the comic One Punch Man. Ding Ding's expression became a little distorted, but why do I feel that this comic is not even a storyboard? It's really the magical original version. Yoshida had no intention of taking the comic from Ding Ding, and directly picked up the fourth chapter comic that had been sorted out on the table, ready to enter the editor-in-chief observation mode. Mr. Yoshida, what's the content of the fourth chapter? Seeing that Yoshida had already started to look through the comic manuscript, Ding Ding hesitated for a moment, and then kindly reminded him in a low voice, "It's a little tricky. When I finished the comic manuscript before, I was tricked by Cheng." "Thank you for your reminder, Mr. Ding Ding." After thanking him, Yoshida sighed with some melancholy, "But I'm used to it, really. I've been tricked by Cheng for so many years, I'm really used to it." Uncle Ding Ding looked at Yoshida's melancholy expression, thought for a moment, and then put a page of comic manuscript that he had taken out from the original version back in. "Is that so? Then I won't bother you, Mr. Yoshida." Yoshida, who had already started to observe the comic manuscript, did not notice Ding Ding's small movements, nor did he notice Uncle Ding Ding's unnatural expression when he spoke. Friendly reminder, the content of the fourth chapter of the comic One Punch Man, the last page of the comic manuscript is the key page to trick Yoshida. Ahem, it's almost the new year, please take care of your health, dear readers. A certain cat has been in a tragedy for a while. Resume early, that's all.